I'm Christina Kelly with Blackstone Technology Group and a member of the AFCEA Homeland Security Committee. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Vice Admiral Sandra Stoes, Deputy Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard Mission Support. Vice Admiral Sandra Stoes assumed the duties of Deputy Commandant for Mission Support at the U.S. Coast Guard in June 2015. She leads a 17,000-person organization that delivers the systems and people that enable the U.S. Coast Guard to efficiently and effectively perform the operational duties. She is responsible for all facets of support of the Coast Guard and its diverse mission, set through oversight of human capital, life cycle engineering, logistics, acquisition, information technology, and security. I'd like to invite her to the stage.
Thank you very much, Christina, and thank you very much to General Shea for inviting me here. I'm really honored to be able to have a few moments to spend with you today to talk about the Coast Guard. I think I see one Coast Guard uniform in the audience back there. Anybody else in the Coast Guard, undercover, civilian status? All right, great. Got a little Coast Guard presence here. Well, I'm really excited to have a few minutes to talk about your theme, too, detecting, enforcing, and securing, and the partnerships in serving our nation. And that certainly just speaks to what the Coast Guard does for a mission set. Let me explain my role a little bit better than you might get from that introduction. The Deputy Commandant for Mission Support in the Coast Guard is a partner with the Deputy Commandant for Operations, who's Admiral Charlie Ray. And my job is really like the Chief Operating Officer of the organization. So I'm in the business of delivering readiness of our people and readiness of our capital assets. So to give an example, I'm responsible for the Chief Engineer of the Coast Guard, Engineering and Logistics, the Chief Information Officer, the Chief Medical Officer, Chief Security Officer, Chief Acquisition Officer, Head of Contracting Authority, and a number of other functions. The training reports up to me, the Forces Readiness Command, and our Deployable Operational Logistics Command, and the Coast Guard Academy. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of the mission. And what that does is it allows the Commandant to have one senior officer who's looking across the support enterprise. And so looking to determine and advance the enterprise priorities and look at integrating efforts across all those lines of effort that I just laid out there, and applying standard processes. And there's some real value in that, because as I look across that enterprise and I see what the Chief Acquisition Officer is doing, the Chief Engineer, the Chief of the Research and Development Center, those entities are big in and of themselves, and they can be working in silos. And it gives the Commandant someone who's looking across to prioritize, because not everything can be important all at once. As many of you know, and I think it was General Shea just acknowledging, the Coast Guard is a multi-mission service who's greatly under-resourced. We are always trying to find a way to do more despite having fewer resources. And as it turns out, just this morning, we are doing our regular missions, which at the same time we're still recovering in the Harvey operations and in the middle of Irma operations. And oh, by the way, we're providing security for the United Nations Council up in New York or Boston, I forget which now. It all runs together, but we're able to stretch across all those mission sets. So in a sense, that's what I do as the Deputy Commandant for Mission Support. And I only have about 20 minutes this morning because I want to save about half the time for questions, because that's where the real value of these come. But for about 15 or 20 minutes, I had to pick a couple things to talk about of all that stuff I just laid out there. I thought, let me talk about where the Coast Guard's efforts are with CG Cyber and with IT. And that's an interesting perspective for me to give, because I'm responsible for all the enterprise IT that feeds into the Coast Guard's cyber mission. The Coast Guard cyber mission is owned by Admiral Ray, my counterpart, the Deputy Commandant for Operations. So we bridge between the IT and the cyber, which is a really, really good thing, because the Coast Guard cyber strategy is very clear in that cyber is an operating domain, not an IT subset. But I'll talk about cyber and where the Coast Guard is with our cyber program and our IT modernization. And the second topic I'll hit on is current events. So I'll go over some lessons learned in the electronic and IT domain from our recent engagements down in the response areas for Hurricanes Harvey and Irma. So I think that'll be something interesting. So the Coast Guard has a cyber strategy. The Commandant, Admiral Zukum, put that out about 3 years ago. And our CG Cyber Commander is actually Admiral Kevin Lunde, who some of you might know. He works for the Deputy Commandant for Operations as a Cyber Commander and works for me as the C4 IT CIO officer. So he's got a implementation strategy for the Commandant cyber strategy that involves 5 levels of effort, 5 lines of effort. And those are lead, organize, generate, modernize, and develop. And I'm going to go through those real quickly just to show you where we are with that important effort. So to start with leading, the Coast Guard needs to be the recognized leader for cybersecurity in the maritime transportation system, so anything maritime. And we are responsible for securing ports and waterways. It's getting back to that securing part of your theme this year. And I think that the most recent example of how important it is to have security in the maritime transportation system is the Maersk event that happened probably a month ago or so now. And who here heard about the Maersk cybersecurity incident? Oh my goodness, an AFC audience, only a few hands go up. So Maersk Shipping is one of the biggest shipping lines in the world, and they had a cyber security intrusion attack, and it left them crippled, and they were shut down for a long time, more than 24 hours, as they scrambled to reconstitute. And I guess the reason more people didn't hear about it was because they did do a good job in reconstituting before you started to see the economic impact. But this maritime transportation system in America passes through $4.5 trillion in commerce every year, keeping our nation prosperous and secure, economically secure. So the cyber security in the maritime transportation system is very, very important for a number of reasons, especially the economic security that was evidenced by the Maersk attack. The second line of effort for the cyber strategy to implement that is to organize. We have to organize our command and control for CG cyberspace operations and fully implement the Coast Guard's mission support business model. And I'll get at that in another couple of minutes. But we have 3 different ways, I think, that exemplify how we've organized our command and control efforts to support CG Cyber. And that is that the Coast Guard, for those of you who don't know, we're on .mil, but we're also on .gov, being that we're part of DHS, but we're one of the 5 armed forces, and we're on the .mil network. So that's where we use our email is the .mil. So we had to have in January an MOU signed by the SecDef and the SecDHS, and that was so exciting to actually get a memo signed, an MOU up at that level, and it was actually signed by Secretary Carter and Secretary Johnson to align cyberspace operations, cybersecurity, and the cyber workforce with the DoD standards at the same time that's understanding that we report to DHS. So getting those 2 service secretaries to agree on the unique position of the Coast Guard enabled us to position ourselves to be effective in the cyberspace. The third line of effort is to generate, and that's to generate Coast Guard cyber operating forces. And the start of that was in fiscal 17, we got an appropriation that funded 64 billets, full-time positions, to create a cyber protection team. And this is critical. It's one of the first things that you need to be able to have to stand up your cyberspace forces. And you know what? Hang on a second. I forgot to talk about my 3 elements of organize. I apologize for that. The MOU, and then we stood up a network operations system center, and we stood up a cyber battle bridge at Coast Guard headquarters. So those are 3 events we did under the organize for cyber operations. Then going on to generate the forces with a cyber protection team that we got the billets for this year in Congress is the next step, following on to that step of organizing. So we're sourcing this cyber protection team from existing forces in the Coast Guard, cyber intelligence and operations backgrounds of our civilian, our enlisted, and our officer workforces. This is going to be an operational maneuver element, this cyber protection team. It's going to be part of the Coast Guard deployable specialized forces. It'll be fully interoperable with other military cyber mission force teams and with 2 DHS cybersecurity operations teams. And the Coast Guard cyber protection team is part of the joint effort. It defends the Coast Guard's portion of the DoD information network by maneuvering inside our network and our radio frequency spectrum against adversaries and threats to assure Coast Guard missions and to assure the security of the entire DoD-1 network. And the cyber protection team will also have a specific role under Coast Guard authorities to protect maritime critical infrastructure. So one thing the Coast Guard always brings to a fight, whether it's a cybersecurity fight or any other fight, is there are unique authorities we have under Title 14, and that's why we're able to be such a good partner with DoD and the interagency. Everyone's wanting those authorities. In fact, a funny example of that is that the USS Kearsarge, it's a Navy ship, is down now off the Coast Guard, the United States Virgin Islands, and it's got a Coast Guard team on board, an LNO on board, and it actually has a Coast Guard flag flying because it's got the Coast Guard authority. So it's got Coast Guard ensign flying on the USS Kearsarge to signify those Coast Guard authorities to operate in a disaster relief situation. So those same authorities translate over to our cyber forces. So onto the fourth line of effort, modernize, how to modernize the Coast Guard's C4IT enterprise to make sure it's ready to serve as that enterprise mission platform from which to launch the CG cybersecurity program. And we can't have a CG cyber without a sound foundation. And just like the water, underground water mains, sewage systems, and electrical and phone networks in our country, the infrastructure for IT is old and crumbling too. So we have to modernize that infrastructure in order to be able to provide the enterprise mission platform for cybersecurity. We are also looking at modernizing our business processes. So in addition to the underground infrastructure that you have to modernize and bring up to speed, the business processes are lagging. We have done a great job applying the Coast Guard's mission support business model to the aircraft capital assets, our helos and our fixed-wing planes, to our boats and ships, but we haven't applied the same rigor, the same business processes to our IT system. So to no great surprise, that IT system is lagging. That mission support business model involves configuration management, product line management, total asset visibility, and bi-level maintenance. So it's got a whole cornucopia of lines of effort that enable us to provide the business processes that we need to succeed in our IT business and our IT information systems business. So that's, in a nutshell, the fourth line of effort to modernize. And I want to finish up with a fifth line of effort to implement our cyber strategy, which is develop, and that's building our workforce. And I want to finish up with this because it involves talent management. And everywhere I go to speak, people recognize the value of the talent management. Everything else that you talk about, the lines of effort I just went through, are somewhat interesting, but it gets fascinating when you get to the people part. I think all of us are looking at how to bring the best talent in, whether you're somebody in a private sector, in a public nonprofit, or in the government sector, in the Coast Guard. We're looking for the talented people. And what does that talent look like? And many of us who are our age, or the age of many of us in the audience, have a model we expect from talent, and that's if you bring people in and you train them and you prepare them, make them proficient, they're going to be the right asset for the job. I'm not sure that's going to be the way of the future. I think we need to re-examine how we look at talent. Maybe we bring talent in the same way by training people, but then I think that there's a learning component, a continuous learning, learning to the technology, and a real impetus to change that we have to bring into the equation, or we're never going to have the talent that we need. And we really need to bring people in who are not going to be satisfied with a comfort zone. And I know I'm doing enterprise IT modernization right now, and I've got a lot of people my age who have no interest in changing anything. And yet if we don't change everything, we're going to never be where we need to be. I need to bring in young people who are willing to get out of their comfort zone, who are willing to learn. I know the CNO calls it high velocity learning. I've seen a million terms referencing continual learning, and people who are driving towards solutions without being told what to do and just waiting for someone to deliver them something. They're actually searching for the next change to keep up with the technology. So that's kind of what I would describe as the talent need right now, is a different kind of person who's motivated differently, who understands the world that we're working in. And when I go to audiences and I ask people if they understand cyber operations, they'll mostly associate it with IT, and it's in reality a whole entire operational domain. And that's something to get a person's mind around in and of itself, that this is not just an extension of IT, cut it from IT, separate it, this is an operational domain. You'll see a lot of people put in charge of positions as CG, as Cyber Force Commander across the DoD, and they've never done IT in their life. They're an operational commander coming off a strike force carrier group or something like that, and that's who they're putting in cyber commander positions. So let me stop there with a little bit of a insight into what the Coast Guard's doing to advance our Commandant cyber strategy with those 5 lines of effort. Having taken a look at how we're organizing with the cyber protection teams, how we're managing this with our modernization and applying our mission support business model, and then how we're looking at developing our talent. And let me go into the current events and look at how the Coast Guard is working in the past 3 weeks on Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, and maybe have some conversation starters there in some of what we've seen. Some of the things I've seen as I am actually very involved in delivering the support to the operators downrange. So we've been responding in 2 different ways the past 2 weeks to the need downrange, and that has been SAR operations, first and foremost safety of life. That's where the Coast Guard comes in. And we've been part of a larger federal team. We've, in the context of that, the Coast Guard alone has rescued over 11,000 people and countless pets. And I will have to say, the pet part is fun. You know, you're sitting there in these serious meetings and you're talking about loss of life and life safety, and you have to chuckle at the pet. Did you know that there's pet search and rescue teams and pet assistance teams, and the pets get all the same support that people do? So we rescue pets, we hoist pets, and in fact, there was a great piece on CNN. Did anyone happen to see Anderson Cooper sitting in a Coast Guard helicopter? We had a elderly gent that we brought up in the basket with a veteran's cap on, and he had 2 dogs, like 1 on each arm. And those things came right on in, and I think one of them licked Anderson Cooper on the cheek or something. And anyway, you have to laugh at that. But trying to find some humor in the amidst the seriousness. Search and rescue ops. Reopening ports, the second thing that we have to do once the search and rescue is done. These ports are devastated, buoys are off station, the dredging needs to be done. We work hand in glove with the Army Corps of Engineers in reopening the ports. And like I said, that maritime transportation system, if we don't get that done, that's where we hear it from the governors and everybody else, because it's money, especially if we talk about the Houston area. That's a $4.5 trillion maritime transportation system every year throughout the United States, or annually. So that's a big deal for economic security and prosperity of our nation. So those are the 2 main functions the Coast Guard's been engaged with in Hurricane Harvey and now Irma. And I will say that crisis breeds innovation. So sometimes it is kind of hard to sit at your desk, and we're talking about talent management. How do you get young people interested in coming up with the next great innovations and velocity learning? Well, a good crisis helps. It gives a cause for action. So I will say that one of the things that we saw that we used this time is on our helicopters. We saved those 11,000 people, and I will tell you that it happened while they were working in conditions with 50 knots of wind, where 50 inches of rain was coming down. And my people first told me before Harvey hit that we were expecting 30 to 40 inches of rain. I'm like, you must have heard it wrong. Can't be that much rain. It was. So we're talking about dark, 50 knots of wind, blowing rain that never stops, and the helicopters are rescuing 11,000 people? How do they do that? Well, they don't do it the old-fashioned way where you used to have somebody on the ground that needed to be helped waving a flashlight and the pilot can see it and vector in. We do it with electronic flight bags. And this is a fairly new thing that we've pioneered for Coast Guard aviation. This is a handheld tablet device loaded with electronic charts and information that allows our pilots to navigate urban hazards such as power lines and towers. We leverage the use of ForeFlight, Apple Maps, and Google Maps to locate individual street addresses and vector directly in. I mean, without even being a few hundred yards off, we can go right in. We also can give our pilots important documents on the fly, such as comms plans, operational hazards briefings, et cetera, that they need right there at their fingertips. And we need to deploy similar technology to this, not just in emergencies like we see with Hurricane Harvey, but how about, wouldn't our recruiters like to have those, a recruiter's flight bag to take on the road so they can travel to meet recruits, to develop and recruit that talent, so they're not just having an office in a strip mall where they're expecting all the best talent to just self-select and come on in. Wouldn't it be great if we had a mobile flight bag for our recruiters to take in a backpack and hit the road? Wouldn't it be great for our marine inspectors that are out there enforcing the regulations in the maritime transportation system? Wouldn't it be great if they had an electronic bag? And I picked up the backpack of a marine inspector at Sector Philadelphia about a month ago, and I'm strong enough for my age. I need 2 hands to pick that thing up, that backpack they sling over their back. It's got to be 30 pounds easy. And that's all the books and regs. Why couldn't you have a mobile flight bag, so to speak, for our marine inspectors? So we need to have this kind of technology in the hands of others than just our first responders. And we also need to transform this, this mobile flight bag, electronic flight bag, to wearable endpoint devices, something you can wear, which I'm sure is out there. I'm sure some of you can say, hey, I know someone that does that, where you're using voice and imagery to record everything, so you're not writing or you're not texting in input, you're actually with an endpoint device on you that is doing all this for you and transmitting the data, so you're not having to go back to your desk and re-enter everything you've gotten from your inspection or whatever the case is. So we're really seeing this develops us, our thinking processes. When we see where we used to be, we see where we are today with electronic flight bags, we see where we want to be. And that's with something like wearable endpoint devices for our first responders and our business people who are doing inspections. So the second piece, in addition to this electronic flight bag, is we started seeing a huge use of social media by people on the ground in distress. So one of the very first briefs that I was sitting in with the Commandant and FEMA, a couple of agencies kept talking about 911, and we're starting to see overload on 911. So we started getting serious about this, saying, hey, if 911's starting to get overloaded, that's not good. And sure enough, it overloaded. And so people started to send in calls to the command center by Facebook pages. So the Coast Guard's, our command center's got a Facebook page. They were saying, Facebook, help me, I'm here, I'm at this address. And it's like, okay, we're not used to sending a helicopter or a flood punt boat out to a Facebook post or a Twitter. So who's monitoring that? Nobody. We don't really have that kind of watch standing right now. So the Commandant said, hey, no call to the Coast Guard is going to go unanswered. So we started setting up an impromptu call center at the command center over in our St. Elizabeth's campus. We had calls and Facebook postings and Twitters all posted up to us. We got on board, we trained all of our people on the fly with GeoSuites, which is the geolocation device app that Texas uses to search and rescue. And so we transformed to GeoSuites, this geospatial tracking tool, and we're prioritizing our calls and relaying assets, and that's how we rescued the 11,000 people, was leaning in on how the public was self-selecting to use social media because they couldn't get through on 911 calls. So we decided that, man, for the next disaster, we can't be a pickup game. We got to be looking in advance to find out what we need to develop. And I will tell you that after Katrina, the United States of America came up with the incident command system. We got that from the fire service, U.S. Fire Service, and it's now nationwide, required standard incident command protocol. We need to come up with some kind of required national protocol for social media for geo-tracking and locating and targeting search and rescue. We don't have that yet. So Florida uses Constellation. So we ended up just sticking with GeoSuites and doing our own thing. There's got to be something better than that, you guys, and maybe you can help us on that. We also know that people have been talking on Zello. It's a walkie-talkie app to maintain comms between each other. We've also noticed that people have been, we've been hearing people say, hey, we need something for search and rescue for urban SAR, like an Uber. Like, I'm here, I need a rescue. Instead of I'm here, I need a ride, I'm here, I need a rescue. And we need something like Waze, so that people, the millions of people in Houston, can just drop in their info in some kind of a Waze program. We're flooding here, we notice this, and let that be another tool for government rescue responders to use. So we're putting all this into our lessons learned on where to take this social media, this application opportunity in the future. Another thing that I'll kind of just finish up real quick here on, we need reliable operational mobility. What we need to be able to do is connect using mobile communications pathways, including periods when comms are unavailable. We have to meet our operational requirements in harsh, unforgiving conditions. We must be mobile and operate without dependence on being in a fixed geographical area. A lot of our stuff now is dependent on you being in a command center. And this is going to challenge key assumptions about our current infrastructure, information systems, comms, and endpoint devices. And I'm going to throw that out at you all as something maybe that you can do for us as we look at the whole government is going to need to come up with a better way of doing urban search and rescue in the face of crises like hurricanes, and who knows what else is yet to come. So I'm going to finish it there because I think questions are the best part of these things. But I will finish up with that throwdown to all of you at AFCEA, what's out there that you can help us with, and for that matter, FEMA and the interagency process to be able to do our job even better and learn from what we've seen the past 3 weeks. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. I know no one's shy in this group.
Question over here. Rico Chandra, Arctis Detection Systems. You mentioned reopening the ports. There is a lot of infrastructure, security infrastructure at ports, like radiation portal monitors and high-tech equipment that might have sustained damage that needs to be checked out before the ports reopening. Can you speak to whether that is within the Coast Guard's role to assess that too, or if that's which agency is handling that?
Well, thanks for the question. And I'm not sure I have the exact answer on that. I will say that the Coast Guard captain of the port is the belly button, if you want to call it that, to the go-to interagency coordinator for each port. So they would be able to call on the right port partner to get that done. So we're going to be reconstituting these ports, and believe me, it's not all the Coast Guard doing it. There's going to be a dozen or more interagency partners that are responsible for helping to do each of their parts for that reopening that port. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly how that would be, but it would be coordinated through the Coast Guard.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. We'll go to this mic. Okay, so that cyber battle bridge, what that is a line of defense against the intrusions that we get every minute of every day. There's somebody knocking on the door trying to get in. So that is a battle bridge that's going to be looking at responding to those intrusions, going to be looking at, and a lot of times you don't know if it's so say something goes down. You don't know if it's because of an IT failure or because of an intrusion. So you got to be able to triage that. So that's part of what this Battle Bridge does, is take on every one of those. And back in the old days, which wasn't all that long ago, we just presumed that was an IT failure, and we'd try to fix it. Now we want to be instantaneously on point, to be in there maneuvering within our networks and our radio frequency spectrums to make sure that it's to assess the threat. So that's what that Battle Bridge is going to be doing, is assessing the threat and coordinating with DHS and DoD as part of that network of protection for the .gov and the .mil networks.
So that makes sense. Thank you. Follow-on question, the CDM program is what .gov follows. Are you going to be straddling that as well, the continuous diagnostics and mitigation for both the .mil and .gov side?
Boy, you're beyond my technical expertise there. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
If I had my C4IT CIO, I could get that answer. But we do work closely with DHS, the CIO up at the department, and we are absolutely linked in with DHS, with .gov side. And it's interesting because we can share lessons too. We bring over a lot of insights from what the DoD's doing. Like I will say, Windows 10 migration, Coast Guard was part of that from the very beginning, and DHS wasn't. And DHS is now, of course, into that with the same fervor. So I think we learn from them and they learn from us. So we're completely linked with DHS. I don't know the exact answer to that specific question, though. We'll go back to this side.
Good morning, Admiral Pat DeBerry here. Want to bring the conversation to cutter forces and biometrics. What is the plan? Is there a roadmap or objective to expand biometrics at sea to other cutters besides the FRCs, say the high endurance cutters? And have you considered latent prints for some of the stateless vessels that are out there, the semi-submersibles, to potentially treat them as a IED and have them stored?
Oh, well, thank you for the question, because biometrics is a common topic of conversation with the Coast Guard. I think it's great that we've progressed so far over the years, so there's a lot of goodness there, and certainly we have a lot further to progress. And I know there's a lot of issues with that. That's not my responsibility, unfortunately. That's a Deputy Commandant for Operations, so I'm not tuned in to all the ins and outs of where we're going with that, but we're certainly advancing the biometrics as much as we possibly can. There's a lot of partners that are involved in that, and there's a lot of regulations and rules that we have to accommodate in that search too, to get the right product and how to apply that. So as you probably know, there's a lot of issues there. I'm not aware of all those. I just know that my counterparts on the operational side are constantly working to improve our biometric access and capability. It's obviously a thing of great value. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Dan Bailey with Black Box Network Services. I was hoping you could expand a bit on IT transformation and where the Coast Guard stands with assessing where your IT infrastructure is currently and how you want to move forward in terms of the modernization. I know Project Torchlight was under consideration. I don't know where that stands as of right now, but in terms of timeframes for assessment and moving forward and direction, can you provide any update on how the Coast Guard's viewing
Thank
IT
you.
transformation?
So the Project Torchlight that was referenced was something started by Admiral Dave Derminilli when he was the C4IT Service Center Commander for the Coast Guard. He's now up there at the U.S. Cyber Command as our Coast Guard representative up there at U.S. Cyber. And he started Project Torchlight, but as part of it became absorbed into a bigger enterprise C4IT, CIO cyber modernization effort that actually I started under the direction of the Vice Commandant 2.5 years ago. So we delivered a report on where we needed to go with the C3 transformation effort, delivered it to the CG Cyber Commander slant CG6, our sixth officer, who's the same hat right now. That's going to be separated next year, but that's Admiral Kevin Lunday. And he has stood up the C3 Program Integration Office with 16 lines of effort, and a couple of those go to the modernization. Some of them go to other parts of standing up CG Cyber. So we have a fully staffed team with organic resources plus contract resources just yesterday, we brought on board a senior leader, a senior civilian to lead that effort, working for Admiral Lunde. It's equivalent of a senior executive service. So we are well into our organizing for the way ahead for C4IT modernization, bringing all these elements of the Project Torchlight and more to bear on modernizing our IT infrastructure and our business processes. And I kind of got at that a little bit earlier. It's my absolute top priority for fiscal 17, and it was my top priority for fiscal 16. It's something we haven't put enough effort and resources into in the Coast Guard. I think a lot of agencies found themselves in that position. Before they know it, they woke up one day and there's nothing more important than where they were with their IT infrastructure. We had to go back down to paper records for our healthcare system because our electronic health record system got too vulnerable. Our core accounting system is, we're working to replace that now. A lot of agencies are in that same position, so it's an urgent need to move forward, but it doesn't happen overnight either. So it is my top priority, and I expect that we'll be pretty, we have to get, like I said, the four corners of that mission support business model, total asset visibility on where all of our enterprise IT assets are even, get visibility on those, get configuration management over our systems, get product line management so we can organize, and get maintenance philosophy in place. That's going to take until well into fiscal 19.
Thank you. And do you have any intention of releasing additional industry outreach broadly?
To host industry outreach along those lines?
Yeah, more RFIs or chances for interaction.
I'm not sure at this point. We just got our program manager on board yesterday, but I don't know. But I would expect there would be, because we're going to be looking at modernizing and looking at investment. And we have come to love RFIs. We used one recently on the polar icebreaker replacement. I know that's different off subject from this, but it's a huge acquisition. And we got contracted out for 5 industry studies that came back. I know it's a little bit more intense than an RFI, but we've really learned the value of RFIs. We just sent one out for our small UAS. I can't imagine we wouldn't be sending out RFIs as we move forward on this. All right, yes, sir.
Yes, Andy Lieber with Management Concepts. You spoke eloquently on how you'd like to see the development of the cyber workforce. And one of the things that are in conjunction with this is the acquisition workforce. So can you share with us how you'd like to see the acquisition workforce develop within the Coast Guard?
Oh, well, the acquisition workforce is the least of my worries, I will say. It's funded differently. So all my acquisition workforce is funded, tied directly to major systems acquisitions or minor acquisitions. I never have to worry about that because it's tied to the acquisition, whereas almost everything else that I'm resourcing for the workforce comes in the operating accounts, and those keep getting cut. So for instance, trying to stand up workforce for this IT modernization is just coming out of hide. So since the budget cap agreement of 2011 was pushed down, the Coast Guard has lost 10% of its buying power over those past 7 years because of the flat line. And you look at regular inflation of your services, we've lost 10% buying power. Almost all of it's come from my enterprise, which is mission support, but none of it's come from the acquisition side. They're getting fully funded for the new resources. So I'm taking the whole hit on the other side of my enterprise.
Thank you.
All right. Last call for questions. Okay, we're probably right about time anyway.